there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. In this tutorial, we are going to be talking about jobs, and not those jobs that you go out and do for other people, but jobs that you want to run on a scheduled basis through your Wix website using something called scheduled jobs or cron jobs. And this could be anything from an email that you want to send out weekly or a backup that you want to do for your databases or third-party data that you want to pull in and refresh your databases with on a regular basis. All of these are great use cases for these scheduled jobs, which is a super cool and powerful tool that Wix gives you. So if you want to learn more about setting that up, let's get started. Okay, so in order to get started with this, you're obviously going to want to have a Wix website and have dev mode on. I also highly recommend having the recurring jobs documentation open. I will link in the description below. I have never set up this cron jobs, scheduled jobs, without referencing the documentation, just because there are so many small details that if one of them is done wrong, then it just won't work. And I always set it up and then sometimes get frustrated and then to check the documentation and see that I missed one little thing. So I really recommend whenever you're setting this up, and especially now following the tutorial, to follow this documentation. Take a look at all these notes because each one is this little tiny thing that really can make or break your scheduled jobs. So I definitely recommend having this open. In order to get started with the scheduled jobs, so we're going to go here to the back end of our website and we're going to click Add Scheduled Jobs. This is going to add a file with some instructions and an example. And you'll see here that it adds in an object and it's in JSON and there's one property jobs, and this jobs is an array, and these objects inside the array are the different jobs that are scheduled on our site. And when I say jobs, essentially it's a function that's going to run, which we're going to write separately. And you can have one job or you can have multiple jobs. It's just important to note that the last job should not have a comma after it. Okay, so you see if we have multiple jobs, then there's a comma after each one, but the last job does not have a comma. And so if we only have one job, then we will leave no comma. Okay, so this is what one job would look like. And you can keep the layout that they give you, or you can add or subtract jobs. You're going to need at least one job to do a job. But we can get rid of all of this other instruction code here because we have the instructions ready over here in a new tab. And let's break down these individual jobs and see what we actually have here. So each of these is an object and it has several properties. So one is the function location. So this is the file within which the function that you want to run is written. Then we have the function name. So what's the name of the function we want to run? We have a description. This is optional. So this just describes what the job does, mostly for your own reference. So let's say if you have 10 jobs and you want to just quickly reference this file and see what each job is, then you can write yourself a description. And we have the execution config, where we can define how often this job will be run. And there are two different ways to set up this config. One is using a cron expression, and the other one is by setting different time expressions. I'm going to talk briefly about both, but I personally use and recommend the cron expressions. Now let's try this ourselves. So let's try setting up a file with a function that will run at a specific defined time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another backend file. So this is going to be, let's say, example job. And inside of this file, I'm going to write a function. And it's important that this function be a function that we export. So I'm going to export example job function. And this is obviously going to be a function, so you need to define it. And here, whatever we write here is the job to run. And in the introduction, I talked about several examples of what a job might be, but here we can, let's say, either send out that email using triggered emails, or we can update a database, or we can pull data from a third-party source. Okay, I'm going to show an example later on of this actually working, but for now, I'm just showing the setup. So here is the function that we're going to be running at that specific scheduled time, and it's inside of our example job.jsw file. So now what we need to do here inside of this jobs config file is to point to where our function is located. So my function is located inside of example job.jsw. And it's important to note that this is relative to the backend folder. So I have backend and then directly example job. So I'm going to put this like this. If we had, let's say, a folder with, let's say, all of our jobs, and then this example job file was inside of the folder, then I would need to add that folder name beforehand. Okay, relative to backend, but you don't need to write backend here. Okay, it knows already that this is something that's going to be running in the backend. Next, we're going to put our function name. So if I go, we can get rid of this because that was just an example. And here I can just copy the name of my function and paste it right here inside of my jobs config file. Then I can describe my job. So this is an example job. And now we need to define how often it will happen. So as I said, there's two ways that we can define this. One is a cron expression. What's a cron expression? It is basically a way of noting a certain time frequency, and the way that it's built is using 5 individual numbers or stars. Okay, so I know that sounds crazy, but let me show you some helpful tools that help you set up cron job expressions, and hopefully that will give you a little more insight into how this works. It's something that's very specific for this use case, so I don't really recommend memorizing it. And here is one tool that I like to use. There are several different websites like this if this one isn't to your liking. But basically, you can see here that each part of the cron expression has a meaning. So the first number is minutes, and then hours, and then day, and then month, and then day of the week. So for example, this is a cron job for do something at 4:05. Okay, this is in the AM, 4:05 a.m. And if I was to add, let's say, a day of the month, so let's say I was to add 3 here, so this would run at 4:05 a.m. on every third of the month. So January 3rd, February 3rd, March 3rd, always at 4:05 a.m. And if I wanted to change the time, then I can change this. So I can change it to 7, and then it would run at 7:05. Or I can just say round 7, that works for me too. Okay, you can also just add a star if you don't want to um, set a specific minute. Okay, so you can, and it has a very handy kind of what's the word? Just like a written expression of what the meaning of this cron expression is. So at every minute past hour 7 on day of month 3. So this is quite often. Okay, so that's something that you wouldn't really want to happen. So you'd probably want to have this 0 here so that it's at 7 a.m. on the day of month 3. Okay, and here, for example, you can set the month. So if we set this, that'll be on every June 3rd it'll run. And if I want something to be every day of a week, so for example, I can set here 2. And here this is kind of weird because we set up like a little too much in terms of conditions. But if I get rid of these two, so this will be on every Tuesday. And if I had the month in here, then it's every Tuesday in June. Okay, you can figure out based on how frequently you want to run your specific job, you can figure out what the right cron job is for you. One thing to note is that when using the cron jobs, there's a limit in Wix that you can run the job at most once an hour. Okay, and all of this, again, is inside the documentation. And if you read all of these important notes here, then it says everything that I'm saying and more. So I definitely recommend reading them, but the the most frequent that you can run the jobs is once an hour in Wix. So you wouldn't be able to do those jobs that run, every 5 minutes, let's say. I think that would be, let's put stars here. Let's say at minute 5. I guess that would be minute 5 of every hour. So maybe at every minute, let's say. Okay, this is an expression for at every minute, so you wouldn't be able to run this on Wix. Okay, it wouldn't run. It's also important to note that when you're running the jobs on Wix, it might not happen at that very second that you set. It could take sometimes even a few minutes for the job to run because there might be some kind of queue in the back end. I'm not sure exactly how they're running this, but don't don't go crazy if, oh, it passed exactly 7:05, it didn't run. Okay, give it another minute or two and it'll probably run. So this is how to set up the cron jobs. Another tool that is very valuable is this tool. I'm guessing it was built by a developer, Shunia. I don't think this was developed by Wix themselves, or maybe that's somebody who works for Wix, even though it looks very well done, but I think it's like some built by an individual developer. But this is kind of a full-blown solution specifically for Wix for setting up the cron jobs. So this can help you, here you just put your function location, your function name, the description, and you can pick kind of when you want it to run. So here you have an option for cron, which is what we were talking about before, and you can set up kind of the different cron options. And you can see here also weird things that they're doing here, /2 and, um, here it says Tuesday, Sunday. Okay, so there's different ways to write these cron jobs. And the other option for setting up the timing that's not cron has to do with these other three options that you see here. So daily, okay, so this would be every day at, here it's 00, so at 12 a.m., but if we change this to, let's say, 7 a.m., okay, so that would be daily at 7 a.m. You could do it weekly, okay, so 7 a.m. on Mondays. You could also do it monthly, so the first of every month. And you can see here that this replaces the cron job. Okay, so for example, how this would be written over here in the editor. So instead of the cron job that we have over here, I'm just going to remove this. Then we would set up time, and then it would be 00 or 7, like that. I'm just going to double check here with that example. Yeah. So it would be like this. And again, all of this is explained inside of the documentation here on the bottom. This is the part that explains about the time, day, date option of setting things up. But again, I recommend the cron jobs because I think it gives a little more flexibility and certainty. Yeah, but there's two options, so I'm explaining both. Okay, so let's get rid of this, and I'm going to leave the cron expression. And I want to set up a cron expression that will run at a certain time that is going to be a time that's going to pass in this tutorial. But before we do that, I just want to set up the actual thing that I want to happen in terms of our example. So I'm going to go into example job. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show an example of a function that backs up a collection every, let's say, once a day. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to create a collection. So let's just call this primary. This is going to be our primary collection. I'm going to zoom out and create that. And let's add a field. Just going to add a number field. And here we're going to say, let's say 1, 2, 3, and I'll just add numbers 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is going to be our primary database. This is like a database that users interact with on a day-to-day basis. And then we're going to have our backup database. So I'm going to create a collection, and I'm going to call this backup and create. So I could build this just to mirror that exact database, but instead what I'll do is I'll create a situation where each individual item is a backup of the database. So let's say I'll add a field here, and it'll be a date with a time. Okay, and this is going to be the date where the backup was created. And I'm going to add another field that'll be an object. And this will be, it'll be an array. Sorry, it'll be an array because we're backing up a whole database. And this is going to be the backup. Okay? And basically what we're going to do is that whenever our cron job runs, we're going to insert into this backup database, and we're going to have the date that that backup was created with the time, and we're also going to have an array, which is the backup of our entire database at that specific snapshot in time. Awesome. So let's write our function. So I'm going to call this function, let's create a new file just to keep things organized. So I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be called backup. And I'm going to export a new function. Let's zoom in a bit so you can see better. I'm going to export a function. Whoops. Export backup data function. Why am I always forgetting the function keyword? Function. And what we're going to do here, so first let me import Wix data. And first we're going to query the primary database. So I'm going to say const primary query result equals to await. We need to make this an asynchronous function. Await Wix data dot query. And I'm going to query the primary database and dot find. And I'm going to throw in suppress auth here just in case we have some issue with permissions. And then I can say const primary items equals to primary query result dot items. And now I'm going to take these items and I'm going to save them to our backup database. So I'm going to say const backup equals to await Wix data dot insert. And what we're going to have here is we're going to have the date, and this will just be new date. And we're going to have our backup, which is the primary items. Okay, and here I forgot to add the collection name, so this will be backup. Awesome. So this is what we're inserting into our backup, and here I'm also just going to write suppress auth just so we don't run into any permissions issues. And then what we can do here is we can console.log backup. And this is the function that we're going to be running when we run our job. Okay, so let's do the cron job setup again. So I'm going to go to jobs.config, and this is now backup. And this is a function called backup data. And this is backs up data once a day. And now we need to set up the cron expression. So in terms of what time of day you do your data backup, that's completely up to you. I'm specifically going to set a time that is very soon so that it'll run, let's say, within the next 5 minutes, and then I can just show you that it ran in the tutorial. So I want it to go off now. It's 6:40 p.m. by me. It is important to note that the cron jobs will run based on GMT. Okay, so you don't do it specifically based on your time zone. You have to do it based on GMT time zone. Okay, so let's think when I want it to run. So I want it to run 6. Let's see. So now I am GMT, I think +5. No, -5. GMT -5. So I want this to run at 11, but this needs to be written like this: 11, and I want it to run at 11:45. Okay, I think so. If this doesn't run correctly, I'll need to double check where I am relative to GMT. But this is the cron job that I want to use. Okay, this is the expression, so I'm just going to copy it over. And I'm going to go and paste it right over here. Okay, and then I will publish my site. You have to publish your site in order for these cron jobs to work. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to wait a few minutes. I'm going to pause the tutorial so you don't have to wait with me. And when I come back, hopefully what we'll see is that our backup collection will contain the backup that ran at 6:45 my local time or 11:45 GMT. Okay, so we're back. And first of all, I want to show you the backend logs. So here you can see, first of all, that there is a log for job process start. So when you're setting up your cron jobs, if you want to double check that it's working, then you can go ahead to the logs and make sure that you see that line running. And if you have any errors, it will also show here. And here we can see also the log that I put in the actual function that stores the backup. So this seems to be running well. Two notes that I want to say before I check out the collection is one, I was mistaken about the time zone, the time difference. So apparently GMT is 4 hours ahead. So I had to change this to 22 before I actually ran it. But that's just a calculation that you can do using Google. So that's not something, that's not a skill. And the second thing is that you'll notice that in the documentation it says UTC. GMT and UTC are the same time. Okay, they have different meanings, I guess, socially, but essentially in terms of time, it's the same. So when I say GMT, when I say UTC, it's both referring to the same time, and that's the time that you need to include in your cron job or in your time setup for your job. So let's take a look now at the collection and see if that ran. So I'm going to go check out my backup, and you can see here, so we have the date, August 6th, 6:45 p.m. So that's great. It tells me exactly what time this job ran, and it ran right on time. And here we have the backup. So this is a snapshot of our database at that specific time. So this is one use case. Another use case could be to kind of send out emails. Maybe you want to send out some kind of reminder, some kind of notification, daily summary or something like that. That could be very useful. If you need to pull in third-party data and sync it with your database, that could also be super useful. One thing that you need to think about, and I'm just going to give it as food for thought and kind of a direction, is the limitation of having only 20 jobs. So when you are building a large system that might potentially need many, many jobs, you're going to have to be creative with how you set those up. So just to give you an example, let's say we send out email reminders and we want to let the users choose what time of day they will get those email reminders. So let's say they can choose 12 different hours during the day that they want to get the reminder. So you might, in your initial planning of that system, think, okay, now I have to set up 12 cron jobs, okay, one for each hour of the day. So one would be at 10, and then another one would run at 11. And then at each one of these jobs, we would send out the emails to the people that subscribed to that specific hour. But this is not the best approach because it'll eat up your jobs very quickly and it's also just not very scalable. What I would recommend is to have one function that runs, for example, every hour. So let's say we want to run at, let's say every hour. How do we set that up? I think like this. Yeah, so at minute 45 of every hour, that would look something like this. And let's replace that over there. And we'd run only one job. And this job would run a function which queried the users that set up notifications and would check and see what hour of the day they decided to receive their notification. And then if the hour that they decided to receive their notification matches the current hour, then those users will get the email when that job runs. If not, when it runs again the next hour, then they'll fall into that jurisdiction, and so on and so forth. So that's just kind of a general approach for how to create a more scalable job system that doesn't eat up your jobs, and it would make it easier also to add different kind of customizations to that system later on. So that's all for now in terms of setting up cron jobs. It's not something that I use very often, but it is something that is very useful. And I've definitely used it before in the past, and I think it's a tool that is extremely powerful once you think about it. And I don't know how many platforms really give something like that. So that's really a nice thing that Wix offers. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I try and release 1 or 2 videos every single week. And the comment section is open. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.